So recently I had a conversation with a leader he's closing in on 40 years of age, and he was looking back at the last 15 to 20 years, and he really understands and is very aware that he has been successful because of his productivity, his high work rate, his ambition, his drive. He built a really successful basketball program. He became really, really respected as a leader in the community. He's done really well for himself. And yet, when he was looking at the next 15 to 20 years of his life, that wasn't the life he wanted, right? He had a new vision for his life, a life where at the end of the day, success was not just going to be measured by how much he got done, but the vision would be for having lived a good day, lived life well. And so we were unpacking this challenge, right? This challenge for us as leaders where we shift from the doing, the achieving, just the grinding, the working hard, to how do we add elements to our identity? How do we add more just slowing down, being present, enjoying life, and not having to measure every day by how much we get done? And that's what we're going to unpack today in our conversation. Myself and Betsy are going to unpack this idea like that this coach, this leader had landed on, which is, being more content at the end of the day with how we lived our life rather than how much we achieved or how much we did. And the big thing here, I'd preface everything with two things, actually. One is that it's not an either or. It's not you have to drop all the doing. Like at the end of the day, practices must be run, meetings must be had, work must be turned in, right? Like we have to do to feed our family. There is a part of us that needs to do, that needs to achieve, but it's about growing that other part of us that can just be. And so we're going to talk about what that means to just be, to be more present, to slow down. The other thing I'm going to preface our podcast today with is a little bit of an accusation on it. I 100% totally understand that my job and Betsy's job as leadership coaches, where we are running our own businesses, provides us with a level of flexibility and freedom to our schedules that 90+% of our listeners do not have, right? Many of our listeners here, they might be teachers or they might be more employees of a business, right? They have certain constraints. So while we try to share our own examples of how we have grown in this area, we're also going to really try to share with all of you some examples of other leaders, other coaches, people that have had those constraints and how they have grown in this area too, because we know that our situations, our contexts are different. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast, where we are dedicated to helping you unlock your leadership potential and create winning team environments. My name is JP Nerman, and I'm joined by my incredible co-host, Betsy Butterick. We're missing Nate Sanderson. He's still on a bit of a short break, but he will be back. Each week on the podcast, we bring you practical tips and strategies to elevate your coaching. For more, explore our online courses and books at tocculture.com and betsybutterick.com, and subscribe to our newsletter at tocculture.com for our weekly culture building insights and the notes to each and every episode of the podcast. All right, Betsy, I'm excited for our conversation today around a common challenge in coaching, a common challenge in leadership, a common challenge for everybody in today's world where everyone's rushing around and has all these things to do. I mean, I think if any of us ask someone how they're doing, they will often, answer with, "I'm really, really busy." Like we all would describe ourselves as very, very busy. I've tried to describe myself more as life is full. Just a simple change in language that helps me to be a little bit less stressed about all the things that I feel like I have to do. And this is the end of the day, what we want to unpack is, like, as coaches, as leaders, we often feel this drive, this ambition. We're motivated. We want to work hard. And we get a lot of our identity and self-worth from accomplishing a lot. I know this is big big thing for me, and we've talked about it a bit about in the podcast. But we want to talk about rather than just give everybody some productivity hacks and things, ways they can do more. Um, what we really believe is possibly the real solution to this stress around doing more is about how we need to be more, and how we need to, what that actually looks like to slow down, to be more rather than focus on less on doing more. So that's what we're going to unpack today. And I guess I'll throw it over to you here with this question, which is, when you think about coaches that you've worked with, what have you noticed in this trap of productivity and just this constant ambition to do more?
Oh, how much time do we have for the podcast, JP? I mean, over the years, the accumulation of things a coach needs to do, whether they are a head coach or an assistant coach, the to-do lists sometimes overlap, sometimes they differ. And depending on the level of sport or the age group that the coach is working with, those lists are also longer or shorter by comparison, right? It's like, I need to do these things because this program's doing these things, or this school's doing these things, or if we want to be at this level, then we have to do these things. There's so much to do. And with the way technology has maybe streamlined some of our doings, it's almost created more space for us to try to cram more things in. Even if we go to a practice plan, it's like, I've yet to meet a coach that says, Betsy, I, I don't know what we're going to do with all this time. Like, there's just way too much time. I don't know how we're going to fill it. So it's almost a way of being. We talk about being busy is, like you mentioned, part of that identity for many coaches. Oh, I'm really busy. We have a lot to do. We're covering a lot today. It's like, yeah, yeah, we are. We always are. And then layer into it the athletes that we're coaching, they're also really busy, busier than maybe they've ever been or kids have ever been. So this shows up all the time, JP. This constant need to do, and this feeling that if I'm not doing, then what am I doing? Right? Like, I'm not getting better if I'm not actively working on this, or if I'm not spending my time, free time in recruiting, then we're missing an opportunity to get that, next program changer. Just so many ways that I see this show up that are related to an identity of doing being productive, and also a judgment of not doing being counterproductive, or lazy, even, I'd say,
Mhm.
would be the harshest judgment that I hear.
Yeah, you definitely hear that identity comes from the doing so much, and people just struggle with that because I think especially in sports, it's been a lot like maybe corporate culture in some places still is, or was even definitely stronger, which was just like, success and high performance is really, really long hours. It's sleeping at the office. And it's always looking for that edge. And it kind of comes back to that. I think it was maybe a Larry Bird quote, like, he was motivated every time he wasn't working on his game. He knew somebody else was getting out there getting better. Right. So it's like, never sleep, never stop working. And I think one of the things that is really difficult for leaders is that they have role models, but also if they look at their own life, their own success, so much of our success has come from doing, from our work ethic, from the grind. And yet, at a certain point, all this doing, this grinding, the ROI starts to diminish, and it actually starts to become something that inhibits or puts a ceiling on our performance. And so it's, maybe reducing some of that doing and focus more on, uh, you know, making space to maybe do a little less, or just to be present, be more with people, focusing more on our being is really the key to actually improving our performance, right? And as a leader, and um, whatever about performance is also just potentially our happiness and fulfillment in our work for sure.
And as you're talking, JP, I'm thinking about, from the flip side, if I'm talking with athletes, when they talk about their coaches, very rarely do I hear an athlete of any age say, well, they did all these things for me, or they did all these things for our team. They often talk about feelings, like, coach made me feel this way, or I always felt like coach believed in me. That's not a doing thing, that's a being thing. And so you talk about that value, and an example from the start of my coaching, when I say coaching, I mean professional coaching journey. I was 27 when I got my integral coaching certificate through New Ventures West. I was the youngest in my class by about 18 years. There were 20 of us in the class. Many people, this was kind of a second career. A lot of people self described as recovering HR. And my coach at the time during the program, because I had a imposter syndrome. I was like, who am I to coach executives, who are going to be 20, 30 years older than me? I'm 27. I've never worked in corporate America. Who am I to do this work? And my coach during my time in the program very wisely said, Bets, I'm curious what it would look like for you if you focus less on preparing, AKA doing, and more on being, on cultivating the presence, so that when you show up to potentially coach a client, there's no question that you know what you're doing, because you've developed the quality of presence that tells them that you have something to offer in that space. Reflectively, she was probably being very kind and saying, look, kid, there's no way you can make up for, the 20 years of experience you don't have. So this is going to be the fastest way to convince people that you do know what you're doing. But I
Mm.
never forgot that. And when I put it in a sports context now, and I think about what really matters, what's remembered, what's meaningful long term, both for coaches and athletes, it's less about the things that they did. Sure, if you win a championship, that's going to be memorable. If you go through hard things, that's going to be memorable. But it's more the connection that they had. And I think that connection piece is sometimes what we miss when we get so caught up in the performative doing.
Mm. Yeah, I don't hear many athletes also complain about their coach not working hard enough, right? I'm sure there are some out there, and I'm sure there are some coaches that, but I imagine people, especially listen to this podcast, there's not, they're hardworking. If you're a listener, I get that. I'm sure that's the case. And athletes, it's more about how your coach shows up and that's probably what your athletes are complaining about, is when you don't show up your best. I mean, I just think about just recently, I showed up kind of rushed to coach my daughter's team in football. And I show up on the field and it's like 5 minutes and we're in a different field that we've never been on. And I got to figure out how to turn the lights on. And I'm thinking about this new, okay, what I got to make some adjustments in the practice plan. And I got to figure out, which coaches do I have today? And I have conversations with, I got all these things I got to do. Right. And I forgot to do the one most important thing, which was just to be with my athletes. Right. And I have a really good habit, a discipline, that I will go and connect with all my athletes, welcome them, have a smile on my face, make them feel really awkward and uncomfortable with, wanting high fives and stuff like that. I definitely, have a way that could sometimes, they're just like, this guy's a little bit cheesy and corny. And that's totally fine. But like, I like that presence means so much to them. So anyways, I go to this practice and I don't do any of that. I just am rushing around like a headless chicken. And then it's like straight into the practice and I'm barking out orders, and just how I showed up for my athletes that day felt so different for them. And it felt different for me at the end. And I didn't enjoy the session as much. And they were less resistant to my coaching and things just didn't go as well. And so I just kind of, it's just, this is a big thing. Like, how often as a coach are we caught up in all that we have to do?
For the coaches out there that are like, yeah, I get it, JP. Like, presence is important. Also, there's a lot I have to do. You don't know me, you don't know my program. I'm the only coach, or I'm a volunteer, or I don't have the resources or help that I need. There's so much that I actually have to do. So, what advice do you have to offer for the coach that acknowledges this could be really helpful, and their truth is, I have so much I have to do, and I'm the only person who can do it?
Yeah, I think the temptation is in this, for people to feel like we're saying potentially like you've got to do less, and that may be the case. And I think we'll talk about that, about or maybe setting some boundaries. But rather than like feeling like we have to balance, and what's the right amount of balance between being and doing, like how much, first off, I think we got to talk about what it is actually mean to just be, and what that is. And secondly, I think I'm really advocating more for an integration rather than like the balance, right? It's like, how can we be more in our doing? So when we think about what it means just to be, it's to actually be fully present. It could be just being with yourself, like being my morning meditation within my journal and my mindfulness, right? I can do that. I can journal and I can meditate, but am I really there? Am I present in that? Or is my mind elsewhere? Am I rushing? Am I feeling this anxiety to, to be someplace else? Or am I just ticking the box? Or am I really fully present? I can have a conversation with my kids when they come home from school. I've ticked the box. I had the conversation with them, or was I fully present? Was I right there with them and not with somebody else, right? Or with my, my thoughts about the work that I have to do tonight, and same with my team, right? Like, is when you're with your team, am I fully present in that moment, whatever it is that we're doing? Or am I just trying to get that thing done so I can move on to the next thing, right? It's just this fast pace. So a lot of the being is just how we're showing up for ourselves, for other people in the world. I don't know if you want to expand upon just what just being means to you.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your integration invitation, because I think often we're like, okay, well, I'm supposed to do less. Maybe if that's helpful or supportive, and maybe you don't do less, you increase or integrate your way of being more intentionally. So almost like that yes and as you were talking, JP, I was listening and thinking about my workout this morning, and I started on the rowing machine at the gym to warm up. And it's a new machine and I'm still learning how to use it and what the numbers on the screen mean. And because it was still dark outside and light inside, I could see my reflection in the window that was to my left. And I'm looking, and never having been part of a crew team before, I'm like, okay, does this look like I'm, maximizing efficiency and stuff? So I was focused on the doing, right? Like, what does it look like? And then at one point I remember getting curious about, like, what if I push through like my heels a little bit more, and what if I sit up a little straighter so I get closer to the machine, so I get a deeper or longer pull. And then I watch the numbers jump from whatever, like 232 meant per 500 meters to like 224. And again, the metrics are arbitrary, but the experience in that moment was when I focused on what it felt like my present experience and what I was doing. By focusing more on being, it actually increased the productivity, the output that I was putting into the machine. And it was around this curiosity of like, well, how can I really feel into this a little bit more? And that was an example from this morning. When I think about being for people, what does it mean to be? Start with a question, like, what does it feel like to be in my body today? What do I notice about how my clothes feel in my body? Or is anywhere sore or tight? Or, just noticing, that quality of noticing. When you talk about mindfulness, when you talk about meditation, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, like cultivating of awareness. Being for me can start with noticing. It can start with a genuine curiosity, starting with yourself before you get into being more present in any of the tasks that are external. Start internal. That for me is often a beginning point to a journey of what is it to be? What is being?
Mm, I love that. One other story too, I think that might help listeners understand this. I just got back yesterday from Paraguay, where I was working with an organization called Team Up, and we're going to have Team Up's founder on the podcast in a month or so here. So, but anyways, I'm doing some work there with Team Up and doing some consulting and coaching and workshops, and as well as I'm working alongside a team that I got over there from Canada to do service projects. We were digging latrines, to install a bathroom for one of the changing rooms next to a football field. We were building football fields. We were building playgrounds, and all these different projects. And I love getting my hands dirty, and I love working hard and getting stuff done. And like the sense of satisfaction at the end of the day when I can look at, well, look what I did, right? Like that felt really good to do that. So we're out there one day. It's like really hot. It's like over 100 degrees, and we're in this really an area really stricken by poverty, and we have this task for the next 3 days to build this football field and paths around the football field and this playground. And I'm excited. This is gonna be a fun project. I'm so excited. And we get there that morning, and they're like, actually, we can't do any work today. It rained too much, and we got to do, we got to get a tractor in here to kind of flatten some stuff out there before you guys can all start the work. And I'm just like, well, now what are we supposed to do? And we're just kind of sitting there and like, what are we going to do for the day now? Like we had this project to do and I was so excited about it. And then all of a sudden these kids come and walk out from these different houses. I guess they hadn't started school yet in South America. And it was like the next week. And so there's maybe, 5, 6 kids that kind of walk up to us and nobody speaks English and from them and nobody in my group speaks Spanish. So we're just kind of looking at them. We're like, outside of hola and como te llamas, like we have nothing else to say. And I'm like, what do we do? And then like eventually I'm like, we gotta go get a soccer ball. So I run and grab a soccer ball, or a couple soccer balls, and we start playing games in the streets. And I know we were doing something with them. We were playing soccer, but what was so impactful was just being with these kids, right? And we at one point we know we're all exhausted and we're all so hot. We're just sitting down there, we're just sitting next to them, you know, struggling to have a conversation and but we're just with them and we're present with them and fully engrossed in that moment. And all of a sudden, everything else changed for the next few days as we go through this project. Not only do the kids come out and help us, like literally voluntarily come out and help us start with the rakes and shovels as we're digging trenches in over 100 degrees, superhuman heat. These young kids that are like they're actually very well malnourished and all this, but like the quality of our work changed. All of a sudden, we had a deeper connection and relationship, and we knew their names and we knew little things about them, and we knew things about their personality. I mean, it was really, really special. So by just being with these kids for a day, all the things that we ended up doing significantly changed and were enhanced. And so I think this is just a thing of like, and we were able to be more with those kids while we did the work. So it's this integration. Yeah, we're still doing, but we got to focus more on our being and being with people and being present. And that's just one other example there, I think, of the power of being.
Yeah, and for folks listening, if this is something that you wanna start to try on, I mean, make yourself a to-do list, and some of you are like, "Betsy, I already have several. They're on sticky notes right in front of my desk, like, I'm never not without my to-do list." Fantastic. So, once you've made your to-do list, you can make yourself a to-be list, because the reality for many of us is the volume of work is unlikely to change. And I know JP mentioned we're gonna talk about boundaries, and we're gonna talk about tools or ways that people can influence the volume of to-dos, but let's say nothing changed. If you've got your to-do list, even for today, asking yourself the question, how do I want to be? What is my intention or quality of presence as I go about doing these things? Even that shift, your workload hasn't changed. The way that you show up to do the work, when that's different, everything starts to change. And it's so cool to hear about the experience that you had and the way that, sure, it was a forced maybe being because you'd planned on doing, and then that plan changed. And it's like, okay. And all the wonderful things that came from being present with those kids that doing would not have accomplished in the same way.
Hmm. Yeah, and I love their encouragement. I mean, I think it comes back to this idea of identity. Like, who do I want to be, right? Within whatever I do today, who do I want to be? For me, I come back to my core values of love, gratitude, discipline, and curiosity. I want to be curious. I want to be loving. I want to be disciplined, right? All right, whatever I do today, I want to show up in that way. And so, focusing on being that's one way to go about it as well. I also think one thing too is to maybe start to redefine what success looks like in a day, because I think sometimes our definition of successful day, like a successful day for JP a year ago, honestly, and I got coaching on this, and my coach really helped me to redefine success. But my definition of success was getting a lot of shit done, honestly, like just getting a lot done, like knocking out. Man, I got so much off my to-do list, but I've come to recognize that, man, I knock off a lot there, and there's a lot more still waiting. There's always more I could have, gotten done. And I would do so much. I'd just jump from one thing to the next that I'd lose the joy. I'd lose the fulfillment out of my work. And I wouldn't be as present. And I wouldn't, and I'd also be just so depleted by the end of the day. And so by redefining success, success isn't just about getting a lot done. Yeah, productivity has helped me to become successful as a coach and all the things I do and write all these books. Great. But like focusing instead, not just on that definition of success, but success is working at a more natural pace and being present with whatever it is that I'm doing with whatever person I'm having a conversation with. And that I actually feel like not only is the quality of my work has improved, I actually really haven't suffered much, like when it comes to productivity, right? There's just this weird thing that I'm still fairly productive, right? I haven't had to make that sacrifice, but I've just also balanced that success isn't just about doing a lot today. Success is is more about how I show up and the pace of which I work, and there are a lot more fulfillment and joy come from that, and everything just becomes enhanced in that.
JP, a lot of this when we talk about being and doing, and you're just mentioning, a year ago, JP, and what does success look like? And something that's come up for me when I reflect on the pace of work, but also, we have two kids, one just turned 4, the other's just about to turn 2, wanting to be present with them, needing to be present in my work. There's this constant feeling of not enoughness in both spaces. And I tend to get very self critical about not doing enough as the mom, parent, partner I want to be, not doing enough as the business owner that I want to be. And that doesn't really serve anybody, least of all me. And so, success, one of the ways that I've redefined it with the kids, is less about time spent with the kids and more about that quality of presence. It's like, did I say yes more often than no? So if Sattler's like, Mama, do you want to play pretend with me? Even if it's yes, let me finish, washing these dishes, and then I would love to play pretend with you. So even if it's a delayed yes, it's like, how many times a day did I suspend my agenda to be fully present with whatever they wanted to do? How many times a day did I physically get down on their level? How many times a day did I let them show me something or teach me something and just be with whatever they wanted to do or how they wanted to be in that moment? Because even fewer minutes spent like that with a heightened quality of being for them is much more impactful than if I spent more time in a distracted way. So this comes up for me often, and I know, especially in the work that we do with clients, like that quality of presence, holding space for other people, the way that that impacts not just what we experience as individuals, but the collective we of a team. When we talk about present leaders, when we talk about leaders that have that being dialed in, not that it's always the same, but that they are very conscious and intentional about their way of being, the translation of what's possible for the individuals that are part of that environment is it's high quality stuff. Yeah, it's hard to measure
Mhm.
that kind of impact from one shift, and cultivating more of that skill set of being.
Yeah, and this is one huge practice that I think every coach and team could implement, and I do it when I hop on a coaching call. I'll do it beforehand. If a coach hops on or a leader hops on a call with me, and I feel that they're stressed and they're not ready to be present, I will often invite them to do this as well. And I do it with teams that I work with. Now I go in and I teach kind of a centering activity, some sort of mindfulness practice where we just take a few deep breaths. We're exhaling, maybe even close our eyes, just feel our feet on the floor, feel gravity, check in on our breath, our posture, maybe relax our posture, right? I mean, it's a 60-second to 3-minute little routine that just helps people to slow down from and transition from one thing to the next. Maybe they came from school, practices, classes. Maybe they just had something really stressful happen in their life. They got a text or something like that, or maybe they're on their phone, right? Whatever it is, looking at the news. I mean, there's just a million different things that we come into a practice, we come into a meeting with a player, we come into another interaction with our family member. And just by taking even that transition, I know coaches that come from really, really high stress situations and they don't feel like they show up for their family when they get home. And just I have many clients that just have a practice of in the driveway, in the car, just doing 1 2 minutes, but just a breathing centering activity, just so they can go and show up, right? All they're asking is just 1 or 2 minutes to sit there and reflect. And I mean, how often do we pull up and we park our car and we pull out our phones and we just scroll through a few emails or a few more text messages or some other bull crap on social media? Like instead of just take that time and now and just take it as a centering activity, just to be present with whoever that you're gonna, whether it's your family or you're going into a meeting. So just a centering activity. I invite everybody to try that practice because I don't do it enough. I'm not perfect about it, but when I do, I know that my being, who I show up as, is significantly enhanced.
Yeah, and I love that you're, talking about things that coaches can do for themselves, with their team, I mentioned, you talk about driving. It's like we pick up our phones, when we pull in the driveway. Same thing at stoplights. And you can watch at any light you pull up to. It's like you stop, and then most people pick up their phone. Even if you didn't do that, and maybe it's not every light, but maybe it's, one light or one stop sign. It's like if you make a full and complete stop at a stop sign, I'm thinking about there's 3 stop signs leaving my neighborhood. Like if when I made a complete stop, I took one intentional deep breath before going. Let's assume there's no cars, waiting for me or whatnot. Same thing when I get to a stoplight, instead of picking up my phone, what if I spent that time with my eyes open so I can see when the green, comes? But what if I spent that time being intentional about my breath? It's these small moments of shifting attention, of bringing intention to the way that we are existing in the world that can start to be catalysts for long-term change. The other thing I was thinking about, for me, music holds transformative power. So sometimes I'll listen to a type of music to get into a certain mood or felt sense of being that I may not already be in. So let's say things are really stressful. I might listen to, let's say, something that's instrumental, or I might listen to jazz, or I might listen to, something that has more of an innate creativity to it. If I'm looking to transition into a space where, okay, now I'm going to be problem solving for a client or coming up with a new activity for a team. So using whatever is already part of your environment, whatever already feels supportive and accessible, maybe in a slightly different way than you're accustomed to using it, to start to cultivate greater intention around your way of being.
Those are some great examples. I think another thing too is just to find ways to disconnect from technology. I know mentioned just there shortly a second ago, like about how those become triggers, things that pull us out of being and just focusing more on things that we're going to do or things that we're not doing. Right when we check our email or we go on social media and we see all the other things that our other coaches or other leaders are doing. Um, so obviously, setting up some boundaries there, I think is really important. One thing that I have, and it's a little bit of a hack, and I'm not big into hacks, but I've actually downloaded an app called Clear Space, and anytime I open up Google Chrome, my browser, or my email, it encourages and asks me to do a bit of a quick breath mindfulness type of thing. Now, this does two things. One is it goes, do I really want to spend the 10 seconds doing this mindfulness breath so that I can use Google Chrome or my email? Do I really need to check my email? So it gets me, it's like a bit of a friction there. The second thing is it also invites me, if like, okay, if you are, but let's just slow down for a second. Right. And it's an opportunity for me to pause. Right. I think that's a really huge piece. The other thing I would encourage um, coaches to do is to start to set boundaries in their life, right? There are things that we need to say no to, and I think at the end of the day, so many of us, we build our lives around our work, right? Around coaching, around all these things that we need to do. Ideally, we would build coaching and leader or work around our lives. Now that may not always be fully possible, and so it's finding ways to integrate that. But I do think there are times of the day where we need to pause and say, no, we're going to really not do work at these periods of time, and what gets done gets done. And at a certain point, am I willing to fail at my film, breakdown or my practice plan not being perfect? Or am I willing to fail at this relationship that is really, really important, or I say is really, really important to me when I go home? And so by setting boundaries, I'm going to work until this time. And then for 2 hours, I'm going to be with my kids and I'm going to work for this period of time. And then I'm going to go to bed, right? Creating certain consistent boundaries can be helpful. And then also making sure that we honor those. And I had one coach who really struggled to honor that time, and the biggest thing that would pull him away from that was his phone. And so his 3 little kids actually made him a phone bed. So it was for dad when he came home after hockey practice, is like, put the phone in the bed. His little shoebox is by the door, and they would kindly remind dad to put that phone away when he came home into his phone bed. So just making sure we have those boundaries and that we honor those boundaries can be really, really helpful for us to be present.
I love the phone bed idea. I'll probably use that at some point in some way, whether it's with myself or with a future client, because I think that's fantastic, especially that the kids made it, right? Because now they're involved and it's a reminder of purpose. I know the word boundaries for many people can have a negative connotation. We understand the positive purpose, but setting them, holding them, who's going to be impacted or influenced? What are they going to think about my boundaries when I suddenly have them, when I didn't have them before? And A quote that always comes up for me around boundaries is, the only people who will be upset when you set and hold boundaries are those that benefited from you having none. And I'm reminded of that, like when people feel challenged of, oh, I don't know what it's going to be like when I set a boundary. It's like, well, the people who really care about you and support you and love you will appreciate that you're doing this for yourself because they understand how important it is. Switching our mindset around the language too, if we often think about boundaries as keeping things out, sometimes it can be helpful to shift to a mindset of boundaries allow us to be intentional about like holding space. And that's holding space has been the shift that I found most helpful. Okay. We're not talking about setting boundaries, we're talking about holding space. What do you want to hold space for that you know is really important in your life? Like in the morning when our kids wake up, we hold space with no phones in the morning when our kids are in bed with us and we're reading books and having coffee, because that's a sacred space. We hold space for no phones at the dinner table because this is a family time and a family space. And even though, yes, our kids are young and we could just pick up our phone and just answer this one text message, or it's coming up on our watch, or it's like, what do you want to hold space for? So if you're listening and setting boundaries might feel like, I don't know, JP, I don't know if I can do that. Think about holding space. What do you want to hold space for and why? And then what needs to be true in order for that to be a space that you feel really good holding because you understand the purpose and you get a lot of value about maintaining that.
Yeah, when you talk about that space, there's two things that I have found helpful for myself and for leaders I work with. One is to schedule the space. Like, show me your calendar and and I'll tell you what's important to you, right? Like something like that is the quote. But like people really don't like this thought of like block scheduling out their day. At first, it often seems like structured, it feels constrictive. And yet, what I've learned and the research would show is that actually by having the discipline to block schedule out your day of, hey, from 7 to 8, I'm going to do this. From 8 to 9, I'm doing this, or whatever it is. By block scheduling out your day the night before or in the morning, most people prefer the night before at some point. It actually it helps you to live with intention and then to be more present within that space, right? So scheduling the space is really important, and then also inviting others to hold you accountable to that space. So with the phone things, like we're the same. We try to have dinner as a family every night together when possible. But when it comes to phones, our kids and my wife Melissa is encouraged to, at any time I have my phone out, to ask me to put that away, unless I've asked for that permission in the presence, right? Hey, I need to send a message or this. Do you mind if I do that? Right? Like just anytime we can be called out on that, right? So whatever it be, it's just maybe sharing that schedule, that space with people. Maybe you've committed to one-on-ones with your players throughout the season, right? And that's a space that you want to be committed to and you blocked out. Sharing that commitment with your players and asking them to hold you accountable to that. And hey, I'm going to get it caught up in February. We're going to be in the busy part of the season. I'll be watching this film. Make sure that you hold me to that commitment to have those one-on-ones with you, each of you, in February or whatever it be. And then also just too, if you're like a person like myself that's very ADHD, right? I can oftentimes be distracted, not fully present, and just letting people know, hey, this is a struggle of mine, like to fully be present. If you ever feel like we're in a conversation and I'm like somewhere else, please just point that out and help me to come back there, because I really do value being present with you and I value this relationship. So just sharing that with them is just encouraging people to kind of call you up in those moments, I think can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, and if you're someone who hasn't tried what JP's talking about, block scheduling, highly recommend. And it seems silly at first. Like when my wife was like, you have to schedule time for lunch. Like you have to schedule time for lunch, because what I've realized with my schedule is when I'm not on the road, and when I'm on the road, my day is blocked off because I know I'm on the road, I'm in service of others. Like there are things that I don't yet know that I'm going to need to be responsive for. Those days are easy because other people can't schedule meetings. The days that I'm home, if I don't block the time off, other people will take it. And the lesson that I've had to learn, not just learn in terms of putting into practice, but learn in terms of how I feel about it is okay for people to wait. And this has been a big struggle for me, especially as a communication specialist. I want to be responsive. And sometimes I'll email someone the next day and they'll say, oh, thanks for getting back to me so quickly. And my judgment was like, oh my gosh, I made you wait more than 24 hours. And their judgment is like, wow, thanks for, getting back. I had no expectation that you're going to get back to me quickly. This week, technically, I'm out of office because my in-laws are visiting. And that was really hard for me to go a week putting myself as unavailable to other people. What it's allowed me to do in terms of my relationship with them, to get caught up on other work that I hadn't been catching up on because that time had been taken. There's ways to block small amounts of your time that allow you to be a better version of yourself in so many different ways. And not even a better version, but let's just say maybe a more present or a more intentional or um, a more kind to yourself version, because you've taken that space versus it being taken by something else. Something will fill it. And life evolves to fill the spaces. So if there's something intentional for you, block time off for it. Even if you just try it for one day. Like, oh, today I'm going to try, 15 minutes for reading a book that has been on my shelf for months. And I keep saying I want to read, but gosh, I never find the time. You can't make the time like JP was talking about before, but you can take the time to schedule the things that really matter. Try it on and see what works for you.
Now, if you're interested in learning more about block scheduling, I really encourage people to check out the book Indistractable by Nir Eyal. Just a phenomenal book. There are a lot of little actionable things that I think help you to be more present with people and really fight a lot of the technologies, the things that are actually pulling us away. But you can get all the hacks, but I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to really making sure that you have really an understanding, and you're wrestling with the hard things that you struggle with within your own thinking, right? How you define success, how you see yourself, what is a good coach, what does a good leader do, and maybe starting to challenge maybe some of those limiting beliefs around productivity and associating success with productivity. I think this is really more important now than ever, because there are really going to be in the next, I would imagine, and not to be a little bit dramatic, but like in the next 10 years, I would imagine that with AI and the growth of that people that will be successful are ones that are going to be super, super productive because they've mastered AI technologies and they can use that to the benefit to drive whatever it is, business or analytics within film and data within sports, right? They're going to be really masters of technology, right? So you could maybe invest your energy in there, or they're going to be people that are really exceptional at relationships and being present and building connections. And what is really going to be makes exceptional leaders, I think, here in the next 10 years, is the ones that can connect. All the doing and productivity things, like that's about to change drastically. It's the leaders that can be more with people, that will be the ones that I think are going to be the most successful, whether it's in business or in sports or teaching, whatever it is, right? Those are the ones that are going to be really, really successful, because in 10 years time, a teacher could be, a lot of that can be replaced by, potentially a computer. Same way with all the analytics and stuff within film. It's really, leadership's going to come down to being more rather than doing more. All right, that wraps up this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with other leaders. For online courses and more, go to tocculture.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our weekly newsletter at tocculture.com for episode notes and resources. Thanks for listening in to today's episode.